The Dunning-Kruger Effect exists on the internet as an insult in the back pocket of 60% of Redditors and everyone on Stack Overflow. It's a shorthand to tell someone else, I've got a passing interest in pop psychology, while you're stupid and blissfully unaware of how stupid you are. To be a bit more specific, the Dunning-Kruger effect is exemplified by this graph. It describes this process of someone learning a new field or skill. A person with relatively little knowledge in a subject can have vastly inflated confidence. Then as they learn more, that confidence takes a nosedive and slowly builds back up again, often even trailing behind how competent they legitimately are at that point. Well, actually, as Morgan K. Freeman said on April 13th, 2011, on Millard Fillmore's Bathtub, close, but not quite. I'm sure this post is irrelevant to the rest of the video. Feel free to forget about it. Anyway, this graph, the graph with 1,000 faces, has probably popped up for you in some form on some feed somewhere. It might have even had this specific header talking about the Nobel Prize winning paper that inspired it. I do think at that point you're putting on enough of the costume of academia that you are crossing well over the line into blatant misinformation, because this graph isn't scientifically founded, at least not by the paper being listed. And there are some pretty big tells that clue you in on this fact too. The X and Y axes typically have very vague labels. The X axis is labeled something like knowledge, competence, or skill, while the Y axis is typically labeled confidence. And there's nothing in the graph that might clue you in on how these things were actually measured. A lot of them are also smooth in a way that graphed data tends not to be. Perfect curves in a noisy world. So what does this cited paper say? What actually is the Dunning-Kruger effect? In 1999, Justin Kruger and David Dunning published Unskilled and Unaware of It: How Difficulties in Recognizing One's Own Incompetence Led to Inflated Self-Assessments, which, as far as academic papers go, is honestly a pretty concise title. They wanted to see how people's ideas of how skilled they are matched up with how skilled they actually were. The method they used was straightforward and to the point. Give a bunch of college students a test and then ask them how well they think they did. How do you think you ranked among the others that took this test? The first test they administered, and I am not making this up, was a test to see how well the subjects could gauge how funny a joke was. The subjects were not making jokes or trying to be funny. The subjects were shown jokes and then asked, "Hey, is this funny or what?" They had professional comedians come in to rank how funny the jokes were to act as their objective measure for this study. They also ran similar tests for logical reasoning and English grammar, but the fact the paper leads with, first impression, we gotta make sure they know we tested these college kids' humor identifying skills. It is perfect. Here are the graphs the paper actually gives. You might notice none of them really look remotely close to that famous graph, but let's actually break one down before we say anything too concrete. This isn't complicated at all, I promise. The subjects were broken up into 4 groups based on how well they did on the test. This circle line represents how well the group actually did. This square line represents how well they thought they did. The researchers noticed that the more unskilled groups overestimated how well they did. Their actual rankings were really low, but the ranking they thought they had was much higher. They also noticed that the very skilled groups did tend to underestimate how well they did, but the discrepancy amongst the lower skilled groups was just way more extreme, and we can see this pattern across all of the tests. So the researchers concluded that unskilled people were worse at gauging their skill level. That's the whole Dunning-Kruger effect. Nothing about extremely high confidence, crashing down after learning more about something. In fact, in this study, confidence seems to remain pretty linear as the people get more skilled, but also the graphs are a bit too low resolution to make any hard and fast calls on what the curve of the graph might actually look like. It just wasn't really what the researchers were looking for. But hey, it was good enough data to nab them a Nobel Prize in psychology, right? Well, if you can believe it, the image that attributes this graph to a study that doesn't support it might have a couple factual errors. They did win the 2000 Ig Nobel Prize for Psychology, a tongue-in-cheek parody of the Nobel Prize. Now, while they do occasionally grant that award to people ironically for breaking new ground and messing science up, typically the reward is given not because the research is bad, but because the research is funny. And after reading through this paper myself, I can't say it isn't well earned. The experience of cracking open this paper is wild. It goes title, names of the authors, abstract of the research, story about a guy robbing a bank convinced lemon juice will make him invisible to security cameras. Now, there are fairly convincing critiques of this study, finding that its result might have been largely confounded by how the data was collected and the way the data was later analyzed, but none of those papers start with a man covered in lemon juice and are therefore worthless to me. Now, that's enough data and numbers. This graph has deemed itself too good for numbers, and you know what? I respect that. What I'm more interested in now is, where did this graph come from, and why is it associated with the Dunning-Kruger effect? A hypothesis I've seen a couple of times throughout my research is that this graph was derived from the Gartner hype cycle, which talks about a pattern in how very new, very hyped technologies tend to get adopted. And the graph looks pretty familiar, right? So there we have it. Case closed. Well, I'm not actually very convinced this is the case. The adoption of new technologies is just so disconnected from this idea of confidence versus competence. The only real similarity is the shape of the graph, and honestly, the shape is simple enough that I find it more likely the shape just naturally came up again in a different context. Someone else was also curious about where this graph came from and asked about it on the Psychology Stack Exchange, and one user in particular replied with some really great work. So I want to give a big thank you to Devin Sherman. I am stealing your stuff. To give my due diligence, I checked the sources they use and tried to verify for myself if I could find an earlier example of this graph and the Dunning-Kruger effect walking hand in hand, but I couldn't find anything. Anyway, here's what they found. One of the earliest examples of this graph paired with the Dunning-Kruger effect luckily included a watermark for a website. This one to be exact, artandtechnology.com.au. And I want you to guess right now, out loud, what you think this website is. You're exactly right. It's the personal website of one Adrian Bruce, hosting a bunch of sick cartoons of cars. Look at these things. Absolutely amazing. Now, I have to admit I couldn't stay too long on this site because I could feel myself growing more heterosexual each second, and I cannot handle another major life change right now. So, Adrian Bruce is legitimately a fascinating person to me. He was a research and development engineer for Roland, who is a powerhouse in the realm of electronic music gear. The current keyboard I use to write music is a Roland Juno DS88, and it's amazing. I absolutely love this thing. It seems he retired from that line of work to make art and music, a lot of it being of and about cars, in objectively upward career trajectory, so congrats on that. Anyway, this is the website where this graph came from. Let's try and hunt it down. He has several gallery pages of his cartoons on his website, and we can probably find it there. But after scrolling through every gallery in this list of links, I couldn't find it anywhere. I did notice that the Gallery 1 link went to a page whose URL ended with index.html. Then Gallery 2 went to index3.html. Gallery 3 went to index4.html, and so on. So one might ask, where's the index2.html? Why wasn't that included in the list of galleries? Well, I'm going to reveal to you some elite hacker knowledge, and I need you all to promise me that you will use it responsibly, okay? So you can just change the number in the URL. You can just put a 2 there, and we can get to index2.html this way. And lo and behold, it still exists. It pulls up another gallery, and further lo, and further behold, there's the graph. Now, I don't know why this gallery page was hidden. Maybe it was just old. Maybe it was a mistake when designing the site layout. Maybe he even saw that the image was misleading and wanted to stop advertising it. But what worries me is the gallery might have been intentionally hidden because he was getting harassed by nosy nerds like me about his Dunning-Kruger graph. So I'd like to be very clear, please do not contact this man. Unless you want to commission a really sick car cartoon, in which case he has a page mapping out his commissioning process, which I have linked to in the description of this video. Listen, if one of y'all make me look bad to the coolest straight man alive, I am disowning you. Right out of the will. Now, there wasn't an exact timestamp on this page to tell us when this image was added, but Devin Sherman did something pretty clever. This site had snapshots on the Wayback Machine, and he was able to find the snapshot when this image was posted, dating it to October 15th, 2011. This was the earliest case of the Dunning-Kruger effect being plastered on a graph like this that we currently know of. But interestingly, it's not the earliest instance of someone associating a graph like this with the Dunning-Kruger effect. To get there, we have to talk about Saturday morning breakfast cereal. Saturday morning breakfast cereal, and its acronym, I'll be calling it from now on, SMBC, is a daily webcomic that started in 2002, and it is currently getting daily uploads 24 years later. Though it was more narrative when it started, it pretty quickly evolved into its current form. Daily, one-off absurdist gag comics about your pretty typical Reddit nerd potpourri. Or maybe Reddit has a lot of SMBC-style nerds. The comic did predate Reddit by 3 years. Anyway, on March 8th, 2011, the comic for the day was this graph. It's labeled Everything Wrong with Politics, and the graph has a very familiar looking shape. It's graphing knowledge versus confidence and viewpoints, which is ringing pretty close to that general confidence versus competence thing. The only thing it's missing is any mention of Dunning-Kruger at all. However, someone decided to repost this graph onto a WordPress blog, adding, "Does that pretty well nail Dunning-Kruger or what?" on April 13th, 2011, and is currently the oldest known instance of the Dunning-Kruger effect being associated with a graph like this. Credit again to Devin Sherman for finding this. This blog post doesn't seem to have gotten too much traction though. The post has only 1 rating and only 2 responses. One of those responses is a guy providing a link to the original SMBC comic, which is strange because the OP did in fact link the original comic in their post. And the other response, wait a minute, where are we? Millard Fillmore's bathtub, Morgan K. Freeberg. Whoa, that post from the beginning was important to the story after all. I'm a writer. I'm a real... Morgan K. Freeberg responds, close, but not quite, which makes one of the only 2 responses a not really, and the other didn't really say anything about this graph nailing Dunning-Kruger, so I'm not sure if we can really call this the genesis of the graph's mimetic life on the internet. I'm just not sure enough people saw this post for one of them to have went to make their own Dunning-Kruger graph. My speculation is that someone had the same connection when they saw the SMBC post and decided to roll with it. Maybe that person was Adrian Bruce. Maybe Adrian Bruce saw a similar graph someone else made. Unfortunately, there's a lot of the old internet that just doesn't exist anymore. When those ones and zeros stop being hosted, unless otherwise archived, they're just gone. Which is why I love stuff like the Wayback Machine and the Internet Archive in general. There won't be broken pottery shards of the internet to dig up in the future. If we want future generations to know what this hugely impactful part of our lives was like, archives are the only way. If you feel as strongly as I do about preserving the weird old internet, one that wasn't just the sole turf of 4 major companies, I've left a link to donate to the Internet Archive in the description of this video. To get back on track, SMBC isn't quite done in the story, because they uploaded a very similar image again on December 28th, 2011. The comic for that day was this graph, mapping someone's willingness to opine on a topic versus their knowledge of that topic. Not only do we see the familiar shape again, we see that initial hump wearing the proud label Mount Stupid. And despite this graph, once again, making no mention of Dunning-Kruger, the Mount Stupid label is found all all over these Dunning-Kruger graphs. In fact, this graph, which is definitely one of the more famous examples, is literally just the SMBC comic with the labels replaced and the words Dunning-Kruger plastered on top of it. So I really do think most of the credit for the virality of this graph starts with SMBC, and I kind of feel bad for them because they never claimed this was the Dunning-Kruger effect. They just made a graph of a humorous observation that later got co-opted by someone who connected it to the Funny Lemon Man study. This seems like a weird amount of attention to give to what is, in a way, a piece of misinformation. But I have a dirty little secret that some of you might have picked up on over the course of this video. I love this graph. I love the vague axes and the lack of numbers, or sometimes the inclusion of numbers that don't make any sense. What does 120% confidence mean? This sometimes smooth, sometimes messily cobbled together from other shapes graph isn't a visual representation of data. It is a drawing, and like many drawings, it's art. It's capturing a feeling, an experience, and I know it is because I've experienced it. And did it use that relatability to earn more trust than it probably deserved? Maybe, but I felt this low point, this nosedive in confidence, the thing a lot of these graphs call the pit of despair, a name that a soap opera writer might say is a bit too dramatic. The thing is, I really like it in this little valley. I love the experience of learning enough about something that the enormity of the subject punches you in the face. It's humbling for sure, but this valley is, ironically, a view from the top of the mountain, where you can start to see everything in the blurry distance and really know, that it just keeps going forever and ever every way you look. It's beautiful up here once you get over your fear of heights. Being as factually accurate as I can be is very important to my integrity, especially when making these kinds of educational videos, but it isn't really what makes something spread. It isn't what gives an idea mimetic life. People share something because it emotionally resonates with them, or because it's really funny. Is this video funny enough? Look how cute my cat is. Relate to her emotionally. Share this video. Share this video. Share this. Hey, thanks for sticking around to the end. If you'd like to support the work I do, you can support me on Patreon, get your name added to this end screen, and get assets I use to make my videos, like the music I made. You can also do the classic stuff. Subscribing to my channel, liking the video, and leaving a comment really does a lot for me, and I appreciate it so much. The all-knowing algorithm has deemed that you will also like this video, so maybe give it a shot if you haven't already.